I know you've heard me in the past say that to really understand the totality of the Bible, you have to go back to Genesis. To really understand the totality of what happens in the story of salvation history, you have to go back to Genesis chapter 3. And then flowing out of Genesis chapter 3 is everything that happens in the rest of the story. Flowing out of that comes the whole story of humanity. And if you remember, Genesis chapter 3 speaks of what we call in church talk the fall of humanity, or the sin of Adam, or the first sin, or things such as that. And as you read through that story, which is really, I think, one of the most remarkable stories in all of the scriptures, because of how it begins to understand humanity. And what's found in there is not just simply a story about two people who eat an apple that they weren't supposed to eat, but a whole sense of self-understanding and reflection on humanity. And what's remarkable is you kind of dig around in that story for a long time, you come away with the sense of a lot of things. But one aspect that I'd like to lift up for you this evening is the sense that buried inside of that story, inside of the story of human sinfulness, is the markings of tremendous self-centeredness. That what lies at the heart of the story, and it says very clearly, the serpent tempts Eve with the idea that she can be like God. And there's this tremendous self-centeredness that goes along with it, you see. This huge sense that we can be God. And I don't know if you've ever really thought about that, but what that really means, this sense of self-focus, this sense of self-identity, that we can be God. That we can be the center of the creation, that we can be the center of the universe, we can be the center of everything there is. And in many ways, what we see playing out in the rest of the stories that are in the Bible is the outcome of this self-centered notion that we can be in control, that we can have control of our destiny, that we can be like God, that we are the center of the universe. Because buried also within the whole story, and also within the whole story of the first two chapters of Genesis, is the sense that God is the center of the creation. And so what that first temptation was to substitute ourselves as the center of the creation. See? Does that make sense? But buried inside of that story becomes this tremendous sense of self-centeredness and self-focus. And as you kind of watch through the stories, and as you read through, particularly in the Old Testament, we come across this great thing we call the giving of the law, the Ten Commandments, right? The Ten Commandments. And everybody went to Sunday school. Everyone went to getting things and understands. There are two sections. There are two tables to the law. You remember that? Two tables to the law. There is the section that deals about human relationships with God. Those first three commandments. No other gods, Sabbath day, all that stuff, not to the mother's name. And then there's the other tablet of the law, which deals exclusively with our relationship with other people. And I think that the sense of the law says, it's saying to us again, it's trying to undo the problem that we find in Genesis chapter 3, that we are not the center of the universe. And to understand that means to understand God in God's proper place, and the rest of humanity and our relationship with the rest of humanity. And if we skip forward, several thousand years, we land on Jesus, and they say, Jesus gives a summary of the law. Love God, love your neighbor. Notice how nowhere in there does Jesus ever say, love God and love yourself. Or love yourself and everything will go better. Or think more highly of yourself and everything will go better. Or, take care of your problem first and everything will go better. The the summation of everything that the law of the prophets, that Jesus says, talks about, is to love God and love your fellow people. To somehow work beyond what we have done to ourselves in sin. That at the heart of sin is this sort of self-centeredness, that there is this need to break out. And what is so glorious in this story from the prophet, we hear prophet, and we've kind of been taught to think prophet, ooh, nasty man, fire, brimstone. But what we see in this story from the prophet is this sense of what happens when the community of Israel is turned back towards God. Because what does the prophet say? I come as one to bring good news to this whole list of people whose lives are broken. Notice that's what it says. That the community of Israel, and the prophet is speaking to the whole of the people of Israel, this group of people who have found themselves in exile, this group of people who found their national story at the end of the line, this group of people who found out for them the consequences of their broken relationship with God was exile away from their homes. And so when they are brought back to their homeland, what is the purpose of bringing them back? Not to make them feel better, not to assure them that they're good people, but this sense that they can renew the creation. That if they look beyond themselves, here's what's possible if you can look beyond yourself. If you can look beyond yourself, you become a messenger to this whole string of people, those who are broken, those who are without, those who are lame, those who are suffering in this world, those who have no sense of peace in this earth. You see, in this sense, the prophet is looking forward to this day when God's people become a community that looks beyond themselves. And when they look beyond themselves, what do they see? They see people whose lives are broken. What do they see? They see people whose lives are tainted with the problem that begins in Genesis chapter 3. They see the outcome in humanity of all of the things that we have done to ourselves. You see how, in many ways, how great this story is that what happens, the prophet is seeing this day, that what happens is that our eyes are opened up. We get to see the world in a way that is bigger than ourselves. And we think, or we've been taught to think that the first person we should think about is ourselves. And yet the prophet says there's this day when our eyes will be open to the point where we see the world beyond ourselves. We see something actually, believe it or not, bigger than ourselves. We're able to see the brokenness of humanity. We're able to see the world the way that God sees it. Once we give up trying to be God, we begin to see the world, interestingly enough, the way that God sees it. And what does God see? God sees the brokenhearted, the downtrodden, the oppressed, those who have lost their way, those who have given up on their lives, those who think that nobody loves them any longer. The strangest thing happens when we begin to become God's people. Then we truly see the world as only God can see it. Remarkable story. Remarkable story. And how the undoing of what we have done to ourselves is found by putting away, we finally get what it was that we wanted all along. We see the world as God does. By giving up being God. By giving up being the center of our own universe. By giving up being everything that we thought we wanted, we actually find the one thing that we always wanted. That was to be God's people. what we as Christians have said is that we see then this secondary remarkable thing, that God in Jesus comes down and lives out what a truly human life is like. And so what happens when God comes down and lives what a truly human life looks like? Well, we see these ongoing stories about how Jesus is concerned about all of these things that we continually have missed all along. He sees the things that the prophet Isaiah was talking about. He sees those who are downtrodden. He sees those who are oppressed. He sees those who see themselves only as outsiders. He sees all of those people that everybody in their own self-understanding have forgotten to see. And by doing that, we see this phenomenal relationship that happens between God the Father and God the Son. This sort of relationship that is all continually and completely all-consuming, where God the Father and God the Son become in many ways all one at the same time. And the offer to us is that if we can begin to see beyond ourselves, if we can put away ourself ever so slightly, what we begin to see is a community. What we begin to see is the world around us. What we begin to see are the very things God himself sees. We see the totality of the world. And what a great, great, great thing that could be. To see the world finally as God has always seen it. What a great, great offer. That if we can give up ourselves, what we really get is God. May God indeed give us the courage to see beyond ourselves, and in the process, get that which we always wanted.